Are you a people pleaser? Do you struggle to set boundaries? This may be the perfect episode for you because it's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. And if anyone knows it best, it is this people pleaser herself. Hello and welcome back to the Self Love Archives podcast. My name is Julia Salvia, and if you are new here, you are in the right place. If you have struggled to love yourself more, and specifically for this episode, if you have struggled to set boundaries and have a habit of people pleasing and throwing yourself under the bus and self-sabotaging, you really are in the right place. Because I'm here as your big sister, your best friend, and your self-love guide to show you how to love yourself more and to stop doing those things. My goodness, boundaries. Boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. I could almost feel as if I have imposter syndrome talking about boundaries because who am I to talk about boundaries when I can't even set them myself? Boundaries just sound like, okay, I'm walking down the road and there's a giant tree in my path. It's bounding me from getting anywhere else. It's providing an obstacle for me. There's different kinds of boundaries though. We have physical boundaries, like our skin is a boundary. The outside of a cup is a boundary. Those things don't let anything inside, but they also don't let what's inside out. But the boundaries we're going to be talking about today are less of the physical ones and more of the mental and the emotional ones. The ones that you need to be setting for yourself. Because boundaries are not for other people, boundaries are for us. Of course, we're going to find that there are boundaries elsewhere in life. Like someone else's boundary, like the tree that's in my path, that's in front of me, that's bounding me from getting to the other side. That's not my boundary. That's the road's boundary. When someone says that they have a sharp cutoff at 5 p.m. and we can't have a conversation any longer after that, that's their boundary. But what are your boundaries? We recently had a really beautiful shift in our astrological world. Back in March, specifically March 7th, Saturn transitioned over to Pisces. As you know, every planet orbits and it changes signs as it orbits. And if you're more on that astronomical world and not astrological world, it takes about 30 years for Saturn to make a full orbit around the sun. So that means it also takes about 30 years for Saturn to return to the place that it was in when you were born. And that's called your Saturn return. So Saturn has been in Pisces for a couple of months now. And what's so unique about this transition into Pisces is that Pisces is not a sign to set boundaries, create rules. Pisces likes freedom. Pisces loves to be a part of the collective. Pisces doesn't like to be held back. Rules and boundaries are not a specialty for Pisces. So if you have Pisces in your big three or any really heavy placement in Pisces, you are probably feeling this Saturn return real hard. Saturn stays in an astrological sign for about 2 to 3 years. So Saturn will be in Pisces for about 2 to 3 years. So whenever you're about 27 to 30, you'll be experiencing your Saturn return. Saturn is going back to the same placement it was in when you were born. Now that's the literal thing that's happening with Saturn. Saturn is making a full orbit around the sun. But what does that mean astrologically? Well, Saturn is the planet of boundaries, the planet of rules, regulations, all of those things. I think of Saturn as like the big sister that's always right. The big sister that you didn't listen to, that told you not to do that thing, that told you not to do this, or told you to set a boundary, or told you the rules that were in place and you didn't listen. Especially if you're a Pisces or you have Saturn in Pisces, you didn't listen. And that sister is not saying anything. They're just kind of like standing there behind you, arms crossed, looking at you like you know exactly their entire face. They're not saying it, but their entire face reads that they're saying to you, I was right. And they'd probably get great pleasure if you gave them that pleasure by telling them that they were right. When Saturn hits you real hard, it can almost feel like more of that authoritarian parent that's giving you rules, giving you regulations, and telling you just like how it is. It's this very masculine energy. In astrology, Saturn is not only the planet of boundaries, regulations, and rules, but they're the planet of diligence, self-control, limitation. That also comes with patience, stability, maturity, realism. So Saturn is a super realistic planet. Sometimes the way that Saturn could be is this very stern and cold nature. It's limiting, it's restrictive, it's boundaries. And if we look at all of those terms and all of those descriptions of Saturn, like the first thing that my mind goes to is like, I don't want anything to do with that. That sounds real depressing to me. But boundaries are a really good thing. And when you learn to work with Saturn and you learn to work with boundaries and you learn how to incorporate these limitations and these boundaries in a way that works for you and that is in your best favor, you create so much more freedom in your life. You reserve energy that was meant to be yours to have, that was meant to be used towards other people or towards other things for the benefit of you. So because Saturn is this very limiting planet, this very boundary-focused planet, and Pisces is almost in a sense the complete opposite, very mutable, very freedom, free to think however they want to think, free to create however they want to create, boundarylessness. Let me put my whole self on the line to take care of your problems. I will walk on eggshells all day. Pisces will walk on eggshells all day just to solve something else for someone else, completely neglecting any limitation or any boundary or the amount of energy that they have left or the amount of water that they have in their cup to give. So while I or you may be going through our Saturn return right now, Saturn is still in Pisces. So it's going to have this effect on absolutely everyone. So from March until Saturn moves into its next sign, every person right now is going to be struggling with setting boundaries in some sort of way. Or we're all going to be reviewing the ways in which we have or have not set boundaries and use this time right now to really set them. Although everyone right now is experiencing this Saturn in Pisces, those of us that are going through our Saturn return, we're coming back to this place in our own birth chart where the stars are aligning in a very similar way to that of when we were born. So it's going to feel a little bit more difficult just because of the differences, the challenges that Saturn in Pisces possesses. But any Saturn return is going to be a time of review of these boundaries. Besides Mercury retrogrades, or retrogrades in general, because I know we hear about retrogrades all the time, retrogrades are really for this time of review. But when we hear about retrogrades, we're kind of taking a moment or a piece of time, a piece of this chapter, like a paragraph in a chapter, to review and look back at and see, okay, maybe this could be better if we changed this, we edited that, and we moved forward in a different way. A return is a much bigger review of the past couple of years. In this case, because Saturn returns only happen once, twice, maybe 3 times in our lives, we're looking back at a huge chunk of our lives. It's almost like the initiation into adulthood, the initiation into our 30s, into the rest of our being. I don't know about you, but I feel as though I always hear people talk about this period of time in their life, having nothing to do with astrology, like having nothing to do with a Saturn return, having nothing to do with all of these different things, just having to do with going through something big around 27, 28, 29, and 30, around this timing. whether that's getting married, switching jobs, having a third life crisis or quarter life crisis, having relationship changes, having really big changes in your life happen around this period of time. If I could think about anyone, I could think of like just these really big moments of a perspective shift or really big moments of something that completely 360s their entire life. And I think any of those things could 360 your entire life. I loved this quote from this book that I have called The Only Astrology Book You'll Ever Need. It is a beautiful book by Joanna Woolfolk, and it says about Saturn, under its influence, a person's character is strengthened through trial and difficulty. It has been said that Saturn disciplines us until we can learn to discipline ourselves. If you're familiar with your birth chart, I urge you to look up where Saturn sits in your chart for you so that you can see exactly where that fits for you personally. This episode comes at a perfect time because I just recently had a peak date in my own Saturn return about a week ago. And the peak date is really just when this transit is hitting a home run for you. You're really feeling it. It's there. It's there and you can't deny that it's there. Because while overall for your Saturn return, you'll be feeling it the whole time, the peak dates is where you'll really be feeling it. And on this day alone, I definitely learned a lot in regards to my relationships and how sometimes I need to limit myself in ways that are going to be better for my energy and be better for my time. For example, know when to have a conversation. Not every conversation or moment is going to be timed perfectly. And it's going to be difficult to always have a conversation at the right time or always talk about something at the right time. It's not always going to work out like that. But there are boundaries that you can provide to yourself to take a step back and be like, okay, we can talk about this another time. Or this does not need to be resolved right this second. So Saturn returns are about challenges. They're about responsibility, tests, growth. The hope is that when you come out of your Saturn return, you are feeling this exponential growth and really feeling like this true version of yourself because you're taking authority over your own life. You're experiencing these challenges. You're taking control by setting boundaries. You're setting boundaries and just taking responsibility for your life, for your life's choices, for the boundaries that you put into place, for the boundaries that you make, and for the relationships that you have around you. So lovely old me has Saturn in my 7th house of relationships in Pisces. I have a stellium in Pisces, which means that I have 3 or more placements in the same sign. So I have my sun, which is my ego, myself, my Venus, which is my love and my relationships, and I have Saturn, which is boundaries, discipline, responsibility, and that all sits in Pisces in my 7th house of relationships. So this is not an easy placement. This is a more challenging placement. Having Venus and the sun here, I feel as though lightens it a bit, but at the same time, because of the sign, because of the Pisces, because of the relationship aspect, I can confidently say to you that I am not surprised that Saturn sits right there in my 7th house of relationships. It's always been really difficult for me to set boundaries in regards to my relationships, especially my romantic relationships, especially my work relationships, and especially any one-on-one relationships that I have with other people, and especially people that I care about. And this could be a really big theme for you as well. It's almost like this really good assumption that if you are not good at setting boundaries, you probably are self-sabotaging yourself. And you're self-sabotaging yourself because you are people-pleasing those around you. And you're people pleasing those around you because you're not setting boundaries. And it's like this little circle that goes around and around, this cause and effect circle. If you're not setting good boundaries, you're self-sabotaging yourself. And if you're self-sabotaging yourself, that probably means you're people-pleasing. And if you're people-pleasing, that probably means you're not setting good boundaries. And it's this never-ending cause and effect circle. As we grow older, we start to become more confident. We start to acknowledge boundaries a bit more as we get older. And I think that's usually because as children, unfortunately, for a lot of us, we were raised in environments where boundaries weren't respected. And a lot of these boundaries, especially if you're a 90s kid, an 80s, 90s kid, maybe early 2000s, but some of these boundaries could include things like you weren't allowed to close your door. You weren't allowed privacy when you were younger. Or when you went to go visit family, your aunt had to give you kisses and hugs even though you didn't want them. Boundaries like that. And when those boundaries aren't respected as we are children, what makes you think that we're going to set or expect others to listen to our boundaries when we're adults? It was a really hard realization for me when I went from the stages of knowing that I'm people pleasing because I'm over here walking on eggshells, trying to make sure that the people around me are okay, over making sure that I'm okay. I'm feeling as though I'm responsible for the emotions that are around me, for the energy that's around me. That if my significant other is angry at something with work, I need to step up and help fix that. But there's a lack of a boundary. It's this boundary of energy saying, that's not my energy. That's not for me. I can be a supportive partner and help in whatever ways that I can, but I'm not going to put my energy and my emotions on the line because I'm not responsible for that person's emotions. You're not. You're not responsible for other people's emotions. You're not responsible for other people's opinions or feelings, just as though no one's responsible for mine. Those are mine. Those are my energies. Those are my opinions. Those are my feelings. Now, can those energies and feelings and emotions have an effect on you? Sure. But when we know how to set very clear boundaries or limitations with ourselves, or be very responsible in regards to how we connect and create partnerships with other people, we can be more self-aware and not be in this state of people-pleasing, which then leads to us sabotaging ourselves. When I realized that I was a people pleaser, it was a long process of going to this place of how do I take a step back, but still be able to support the people that I love and make sure that they know that I'm here to support them and I'm here to love them. That then transitioned to, okay, by people pleasing, I'm self-sabotaging. I'm putting myself in uncomfortable positions just to please another human being. I'm sabotaging myself because I'm allowing for someone else to create my time boundaries, my mental boundaries, my emotional boundaries, my internal boundaries, my physical boundaries. I'm allowing someone else to make those decisions for me. So I have no authority over my own life. I have no discipline in my own life because I'm allowing someone else to make those decisions for me. And that's what puts us in this state of self-sabotaging, where we feel like we're in that never-ending circle and we can't get out and we can't find growth and we can't get to that next place in our life that we want to get to. Setting a boundary is for you. I want you to change your perspective on how you view boundaries. Boundaries are not this scary thing, but setting boundaries sometimes isn't easy, especially if you've been in this state of people pleasing, because when you go to set these boundaries, there may be this pushback from the other side, because the other side, the other part of that one-on-one relationship may not appreciate these boundaries that you're setting. If a boundary makes someone else uncomfortable, if your boundary makes someone else uncomfortable, it's a really beautiful moment to consider why, or to consider the relationship that you have with this person. I really loved this explanation on boundaries from positivepsychology.com. They provided 7 different types of boundaries, and those 7 different types of boundaries are physical, like in regards to your physical space, like not wanting to hug someone that you don't know. Time, letting someone know that you have a certain amount of time that this conversation can go for, or this certain amount of time that you can spend doing this activity. Mental, having a mature conversation with someone and letting them know that you understand their point, though you don't agree. Emotional, think about an emotional time where you were in this emotional space, struggling to understand and feel where you're at. And then all of a sudden, someone you love or care about, or anyone in general, kind of came over, picked up their emotional baggage and dropped it right next to you and said, "Help me." In moments like that, we need to set a boundary, an emotional boundary, saying to this person that, hey, I would love to support you, but I don't have the emotional capacity to do so right now. The next one is a material boundary. Something like, I can't let you borrow my sweater. You borrowed one last week and never gave it back to me. Internal boundaries, saying, I've been active and going out all week last week. I need to rest this week and I can't go out to dinner. And the final one is conversational boundaries. This one I'm not great at. Allowing yourself to say, hey, I'm not comfortable discussing this right now. Can we discuss at a different time? All of these 7 types of boundaries are for you. You can see that all of them have I in it. And I refers to the ego. The ego as in the self. But in regards to self, we are setting these boundaries for ourselves. By providing a conversational or emotional boundary, you're allowing yourself to have the time to think about what you want to say, be in a less emotional state to respond to something, be as supportive as you want to be for that person, while allowing yourself to regulate, to be responsible, to take care of your own well-being and your own health before doing something for someone else or something else. I used to answer text messages back like this, so quickly. You would get a text back from me maybe in 60 seconds, maybe in 5 minutes. And the max amount that it would take for me to call or text you back would probably be barely an hour. Unless I was sleeping, didn't have service, or my phone was dead. And I never saw an issue to this. I never saw this as people pleasing. I never saw this as this bad thing that I had to stop doing. I was like, oh, I'm on my phone already. Let me just answer everybody. This person just texted me. Let me just answer them. It wasn't until I set this verbal boundary where I would let someone know, hey, I can't call you back right now. I could talk to you this weekend. Or the nonverbal boundary saying to myself, you don't need to answer this text message right now. You can answer it in 5 minutes. You can answer it in a couple hours. You can do what you need to do now and get back to it later. I started setting those boundaries for myself in regards to how I communicate with people. It has allowed for so much more free space in my brain. It has allowed me to focus on the things that I need to prioritize and focus on, and then get back to that email, that text message, or call that person back at an appropriate time where I can respectfully give that person the time that they deserve or the answer that they needed from me. The point that I'm at right now in regards to setting boundaries is that I'm defining my boundaries and I'm communicating the boundaries, but I over-explain them. Like, hey, I can't call you back because X, Y, and Z this and ABC that, and I've got this to do and I've got that to do. It should just be, I can't call you back right now. Can we talk on the weekend? That's it. I don't need to provide an explanation. I don't need to share what's going on. I don't need to TMI till I'm blue in the face. I can't talk to you until the weekend. What's a good time for you? That's it. And I feel as though even if we are really good at setting boundaries, we may not be communicating them properly. Or we may be over communicating, trying to give ourselves reason for setting boundaries. It's almost like we're insecure in the boundaries that we're setting and we don't want to upset the other person. So we say everything under the sun and over explain ourselves and overexert ourselves to make that boundary more valid when it's valid without over explaining. I loved this quote that was posted on Instagram. It's from Issa, Finding Balance. Your boundaries will make toxic people feel uncomfortable. We feel selfish for setting boundaries, for being responsible for our own well-being. Because who are we to not give a shit about other people's emotions and other people's feelings and how we make other people feel? But as I said before, we are not responsible for that. Because setting a boundary is so that we can create healthy relationships with people. So if your boundary makes someone feel uncomfortable, it's a moment to reflect on that relationship that you have with that person and ask yourself, is this a healthy relationship for me? Especially if you are a people pleaser, someone who has never set boundaries before. The boundary all of a sudden can be kind of a shock to those who aren't used to it, who aren't used to this new responsibility that you're taking for your life. If you are creating this healthier space that you can coexist and still have this healthy relationship in. One of the most difficult things for me when I was younger is that I wasn't good at setting boundaries, especially in my romantic relationships. There was always pushback whenever I tried to set a certain kind of boundary, and their uncomfortability made me uncomfortable. I never learned how to create discipline in my life and how to create healthy discipline in my life. Discipline was always created in my life from this place of fear, this place of, if you don't do this, then here's the consequence. It wasn't this kinder way of, hey, don't do that because you're going to hurt yourself. It was more of like a, hey, if you don't do this, I'm going to take this away from you. Or if you don't do this, then you're a bad person. You're this, you're that. Or even when a rule was set, there was no reason behind it. And it's not that we need to over-explain ourselves when we provide a boundary, but I think it's a little bit different when we're speaking in regards to children and providing a boundary to a child. We are a guide for a child. And I don't feel as though I had a guide when I was a child teaching me discipline and rules and regulations in a way that I could understand why these are being put into place. And that was the biggest thing that was missing. It kind of went straight from the rule to the fear if you don't follow this rule, but I won't tell you why you need to follow this rule. So it was this very lack of understanding, this place of just not knowing. Okay, there's consequences. There's really bad consequences if I don't follow this rule. So I'm going to follow this rule, but I have no idea why I'm following this rule. And because the opposite wasn't respected, because my boundaries weren't respected, even if I felt uncomfortable to give someone a hug or needed a moment because I was feeling emotional or didn't want to have a conversation or didn't want to do something, those boundaries of mine weren't respected or even acknowledged. So because of that, I really struggled setting boundaries in all of my relationships, but more specifically my romantic relationships. I was in this people-pleasing state, thinking that I needed and that I was responsible for the emotions of the people that I was with. This was an extremely self-sabotaging time and quality, to the point where I would be driving 3 hours to resolve a situation that wasn't even in my control in the first place, or to pacify emotions that I wasn't responsible for. Putting my mental well-being, physical well-being, and emotional well-being on the line to make sure that this other person's was okay. So I was part of the problem. It's really scary to set boundaries with someone who you don't have a healthy relationship with. Because you know immediately when you set that boundary, especially when you're in this very confident place of taking responsibility of yourself and taking control of your own emotions and your own life, it's really scary to know that you have to go set a boundary with someone that you know isn't going to, one, respect the boundary or is going to make a big deal about this boundary or make you feel uncomfortable about this boundary. I want you to know that if you have or you are planning to finally set that boundary that you know you've been needing to set with this person, with this relationship that you have, because you care about this person and you care about holding on to and keeping this relationship with this person, I want you to know that I am proud of you. That's the big thing about our Saturn returns. It puts us in this place of fully coming into our being, fully becoming this adult and taking responsibility and control back in our lives, like we should have always been doing. I believe that if I were to have set better boundaries and I was more confident in my limitations, that a lot of things would have been different. Then again, I don't know if I'd be talking to you right now, making this podcast, trying to help you. Because a part of loving yourself is setting boundaries so that you have the energy and the opportunity to do so. The most important thing to take with you is that boundaries are for you. Boundaries allow you to have the space, the mental capacity, the physical, the emotional capacity to be able to continue to have healthy relationships. So if you're thinking, like I was thinking, that setting boundaries is a uncomfortable thing or a not so good thing, switch your perspective. Take care of you and yourself first. You can also hold space for other people while holding space for yourself. But you need to decide how much of that space you need for yourself first before you can allocate it to others. If you are in your Saturn return right now, if you have Saturn in Pisces, I am sending you so much love in this beautiful time in your life. I'm sending you courage to set boundaries in your relationships, especially those that you care about. I'm sending you confidence in taking responsibility. And I'm sending you a ton of hugs during this Saturn in Pisces season. Thank you so much for tuning into the Self-Love Archives podcast. The newsletter is launching soon, so make sure to go and sign up at theselflovearchives.com. And we are going to be sharing your story soon. So if you would like to anonymously or not anonymously share parts of your story, your experiences, or your chapters, or things that you need big sister advice on, please don't hesitate to reach out to me on any of my socials at the Self-Love Archives. See you next week, Sunday, 12 o'clock Eastern Time. Have a beautiful week, and I'll see you soon.